It doesn't matter if you're talking about a 50 life self-funded plan that's a beer distributor or a 5,000 person manufacturing plant. They all have the same problem. They don't know if their people are actually understanding all the products they have.
Welcome to Self-Funded with Spencer, sponsored by Pareto Health, ClaimDoc, and PlanSight. Whether we're discussing innovative new healthcare strategies, exposing hidden revenue streams or misaligned incentives, or even just cheering on the next generation of this industry, we promise you that you're going to learn something. So thank you for joining us for another great conversation about the future of healthcare. Why don't you guys introduce yourself real quick, and let's go ahead and say that you're the first brother and sister I've ever had.
Really? Oh, we win.
Check that box
Okay.
right there.
Well, I get to go. Ladies
You
first.
Go. Okay. All right. So we grew up together.
Okay.
He went the insurance route, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I did not want to have anything to do with that. Like, I needed more excitement, more whatever, right? And so I decided to go into TV, and I didn't really care where, but then figured out that weather would be a fantastic niche. So I spent the first probably 15 years of my working life working at different television stations. So I started in Parkersburg, West Virginia, as we just said, itty bitty little market 188. And the way TV works is that to move up to a better job, it's not internally with the station necessarily that you work for. It's more so like you may need to move to a bigger city.
Right.
Because based off the market size, so Parkersburg 188, New York market 1. So you understand.
So this is
based on
ranking by
city.
the size.
Yeah, designated market area, or the DMA is what it's called. And so the bigger the DMA, typically, the higher the profile, typically the higher the salary.
Sure.
So you move around a lot. So I was in West Virginia, Baltimore. Then I got an agent, moved to Miami. That was a good one. I was there for a while during crazy hurricane seasons. That
Every
was
bad
wild.
storm chased her.
So you get really popular, though, when you're doing like those type of events, don't you? Because you're constantly on TV last moment.
Yes.
Talking about something everybody's paying attention
Well,
to.
I happened to hit Katrina, Rita, Wilma, Charlie, all those.
Yeah.
In that, you think it was 2004, 2005 seasons. So yeah, we would go on nonstop, meaning wall-to-wall coverages, no commercials.
Oh, wow.
No breaks.
Okay.
And imagine if it's after the storm hits, then all of a sudden the reporters can talk about what's going on in Homestead or what happened in Miami Beach or whatever it may be. Prior to the storm hitting, everything is on the meteorologist because you're letting people know when it's going to come, what they're going to see, what we're expecting for storm surge, all that stuff. So we would go wall to wall. We got stuck one time. It was Hurricane Wilma. It was down in the Yucatan. It was supposed to come to Florida and be there in like a day. But the stupid thing stalled out. But we were already wall to wall. So we stayed wall to wall for 3 days nonstop before it hit.
Oh, before it hit. Okay.
And eventually it did.
Okay.
I think it was like a category 2 or something. But yeah, we were on for hours. So we would all sleep like somewhere in the station. So you really couldn't go home. We were 12 on, 12 off, and you would talk for 12 hours.
Now, I don't think I've ever thought of this before, but did you feel an obligation in events like that to be as good as you could because like people's lives may be at
Because
stake?
they actually are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't really connect those two things. And of course, I think you understand the gravity of that while you're presenting, but I didn't think about your responsibility in communicating that effectively to people so they know what to do.
Correct. Yeah. And you have to take all this science, right? So there's a lot that's going into what the National Hurricane Center is doing, how they're making the forecasts, what they're doing with everything, the storm surge, the winds, the rain, tornado threat, all that. And then you have to make it understandable to people at home who might be grandma sitting in her little condo and doesn't know what to do or whatever it may be, right? And so that was one of the big challenges in Miami. How do you take all this crazy scientific information and make it where people know how to act on the information? Okay, so that's like setting the stage for what happens during the storm. Do people know that they really do need to leave, whatever it may be? So I went from there, then moved to New York. And so when I was in New York, I worked for a local affiliate, but I also did, I've done Good Morning America, CBS Mornings, like quite a bit.
Okay.
So yeah, and then ended up in Chicago.
Let's not talk about insurance today.
Yeah, that's fine. This is way better.
Like, just saying, like, this is more
Just
interesting.
ask her who she interviewed, right? I mean, like, the fun.
So I think we should at least touch on that. You had an opportunity to interview President Obama.
Yes.
And did you interview President Trump during his?
Not during his time in office. I actually interviewed President Trump on a red carpet for the Sex and the City movie premiere. So
Totally different reason.
yeah, so it was kind of funny because, he was a little bit past and I was like, Donald, because, you wasn't 45 or Trump or whatever that. I was like, hey, Donald. And he did walk back and then, basically just, I don't know what we talked about the movie or what he was wearing or who knows, because that was the focus of that one. So yeah, I did also cover a lot of red carpet stuff, celebrity interviews. But people who are probably watching this right now, like, what the heck does this have to do with insurance?
Yeah, well, I think
get to that.
Yeah, it's really funny. But I think it's also interesting because a lot of us, Matt, I know, have some more maybe destined for your career path, but a lot of people just accidentally come into insurance and they have all these interesting career paths, the winding paths that eventually led to insurance benefits, whatever you want to call it. I do want to let you have a chance to give your background.
I'm not nearly as interested.
Yeah, you're not, but that's all right, man. I think.
He's the one with TSA pre, though. So he's doing
pre-check.
something right.
I mean,
He's much more
At this
bougie
point,
at the
it's table
airport.
stakes. Like, you got to get TSA pre. You should go ahead and get that. But Matt, so
she was on a plane 4 times in the last 4 days, and she's had to go
no
through
TSA
security
pre.
and no TSA pre-check.
take your shoes off. All
Right.
Yeah. You don't have to take your shoes off
You
even?
don't take your shoes off.
You have to take your belt
And,
off.
and that face wash they made you get rid of,
Would I have kept it?
you would have kept it.
Oh, probably expensive face wash, right?
Yeah, and I was like, I think I can get away with it because I just flew, and my friend got through with like a big regular size contact solution, and I was like, we're Gucci. I got this. I didn't got this. They kept my face wash.
TSA pre.
Yep.
Nathaniel, TSA pre. I've been harping on him to do it.
Right.
He travels with me a few times a year. I'm like, dude, you've got to get TSA.
Yeah, I'm with you, Nathaniel. I don't have it either.
Just go do it.
So Matt, who are you?
All right, so Matt Glaros, the little brother of Megan Glaros, is the best way that I was known.
Is that how you introduce yourself?
That's exactly how I introduced myself. And it's funny because she was always 4 years older, so I was pretty much known as Megan Glaros' little brother.
Really?
Oh, yeah, like 100%.
Was Megan very popular?
She was very
Yeah,
popular,
okay.
yeah.
We didn't go to the same high school, though.
I made a point of that. Instead, I went to the high school where her boyfriend was, and everyone then knew her because her boyfriend was like a superstar there. Right? So it's like, oh, great. So I just lived in her
So you've been
shadow
working
forever.
your entire life to get out of Megan's shadow?
That's funny you say that because there's a clip on TV that references that. So Meg comes back to Chicago in like, I don't know what year that was, like 2009,
it was, yeah,
10,
when
somewhere
Lana
in
was
there.
born. Yep, 2010.
And they're like really excited. They're doing all these promos to like invite her back. And at that point, I had come back from Denver and I had come back to work with Dad in his insurance brokerage, right? And they come to the office. There's 3 of us in there. And they're like, we want to interview everybody about like how excited you are about your daughter, your sister showing back up. And so they start like my dad, and he's all happy. Oh, it's so excited to see my daughter, local girl, all that. And it comes to me, and I'm like, no, I didn't want her to come back. I was living in her shadow forever. I finally got out of it. I finally got out of it, and now I'm back in it again.
That's hilarious.
And even still to this day, like we'll walk into meetings, and there'll be people, and they'll be like looking at her, kind of like staring and thinking, and then all of a sudden they'll be like, were you on TV?
Yeah.
It was just kind of weird because I feel like there's a short memory, but sometimes it does still happen where I'm like, that makes me feel good because now I've not been doing
People recognize
TV for a while. I've done a couple appearances on CBS Mornings since I stopped consistently doing it, but those, just a couple times. So.
And we'll occasionally have like clients then too. Like when she was on TV, we would have clients that'd be like, hey, you mind if your sister comes to like this meeting and gets a picture with us? We had one guy that was like, all he wanted was a signed autograph.
Who was
It was one of the guys from one of the towns.
Oh,
He's like, I just want to get your sister's autograph. Can I get that? And we're like, we'll
Do you
figure it
still
out.
do you carry headshots? Do you have them?
No.
Okay.
Oh, you know how
No.
to get some?
Mom and Dad have a giant stack though. Because I don't even know if we stopped kind of handing them out at some point, but because everybody's online and you can
But
find.
is this an
pictures
effective
and-
prospecting tool? I mean,
Maybe it is.
Yeah,
I mean. So
I
the
hope
funny
not.
part
That's
is like
really
she
weird.
doesn't sell benefits, right?
Yeah.
She's in our communication and that side of the business. But I'll say to her every once in a while, I'll be like, hey, can you go like hit this guy up on LinkedIn and see if you can get a meeting? And pretty much, I would say 9 times out of 10, she can get a meeting with somebody a lot faster than I can.
I think
because
it's
of her
because they're like,
profile,
well, and they're
right?
probably like, why on earth is this person like? What does she want to have a meeting with me
Right.
for? You know what I mean?
Does your LinkedIn have anything to do with the Holly's Health Talks, or does it?
No, because it's similar to TSA pre.
Yeah.
I haven't updated my LinkedIn.
It still says Emmy Award winning, 4-time Emmy Award winning meteorologist.
Fair, I lean heavily on that as well.
I mean, I
Way
just
cooler than insurance.
so,
Week.
I just don't like LinkedIn as much. I find it boring, and I understand it's like very business-y-ish,
Oh.
but
I'll give you a master class on why you're wrong about it.
Okay, I would love to hear that though, because I mean, I don't know.
It can't be. It depends on how you use it, who you follow, who you're connected with.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of funny to me though, because when I first got out of TV, that's a whole weird world unto itself.
Yeah.
And everything operates differently.
Sure.
So when I first started working with Matt, we weren't 100% sure what I was going to do. Like
We had our selling property and casualty for a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, it didn't work.
I was like,
Yeah, it didn't
this sucks.
Contracts? Ew.
I know. I was like, what do you mean I have to find out how many trucks they have? What? I don't even, a truck? Like, what?
Yeah.
It wasn't for me, really.
No.
So, but I would send an email
Okay.
to someone. And then, like 5 minutes later, I'm like, why didn't they write back? And then I'm like, well, fine, I'll send them a Teams message. And finally, I think it was Stacy in the office. She had a conversation with me like, you got to give people a second to breathe and like let them answer and respond. And I was like, oh, this doesn't work the same way. We had no option in TV but to get everything done immediately.
Okay.
And answer everyone immediately, because chances are there was some kind of deadline that you had to hit, and the deadline was every day, and it was multiple times a day. So
Everything was urgent. Anyway.
everything was urgent,
Right.
and I still have a really, really hard time dialing back the urgency to get stuff done and
She
completed.
calls.
Yeah.
She texts.
Like, where
She
are
sends like carrier pigeon occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if she can't get a hold of me, I'll be like, I am in a meeting.
Yeah.
I will call you when I get out of here.
To be fair, I do kind of get annoyed if I need an answer from somebody. I've got Teams text, and I'm like, you should respond. Even if you're in a meeting right now, you could just say yes or no. Like, I get annoyed by that, but that's me. That's not them, right?
Yeah.
They're doing something more important, and they'll respond when they can. Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, 1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale. So you guys grew up in a family agency then, right? I don't think you really touched on the history. I'd love to hear. So it's Meyers Glaros now, which, now we'll talk about the transition to what you are this day.
Yeah.
But what was it before?
So Dad was in the insurance business. He started in life insurance out of college because there were no jobs in the early 70s. And he went into life insurance thinking he was just going to do it for like a year or two and then go into something else. And he really fell in love with like the mission of insurance, which is essentially helping people. Like that's the root of the whole industry, I think. And so Dad did that for a little bit, and then he's like, I really like this health insurance for businesses, and he got into just doing employee benefit brokering. And so interestingly enough, he was the first licensed broker or the first contracted broker with Anthem in Indiana.
Okay.
And so he would like literally was agent one when they launched whatever, I think at the time it might have been Concordia or something like that when they started it, but he was agent one with Anthem. And so he had a really long history with those guys, and he really built like what we'll refer to as a boutique agency.
Okay.
Him and an assistant. So like boutique.
That's
boutique.
it. Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Matt and I used to roll into the office and like photocopy our hands and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so Dad did everything. Like he really was like the all-encompassing person. He would do customer service issues. He would prepare the spreadsheets, which I don't think there were spreadsheets at the time that he was doing it, right? It was like little written out comparisons.
That was stacks
I
of
remember
yellow
him
notebooks,
driving legal pads.
Yeah.
I remember him taking like paper applications and driving to Indianapolis to drop them off because of a deadline.
Yeah.
And so it was that for, our childhood was essentially
Did he
that.
intentionally run it that way though, where it was just him and the
Yeah,
Did he want to keep it lean
That's
and
what he
just
likes.
manageable?
He didn't want to manage people, right? And I think as Glaros is, as we refer to ourselves, like
Glaros.
we don't like to make anybody feel bad, right? So
Never,
he kind
never. We're
of he
kind
kind
of
of
people
realized,
pleasers.
he kind of realized like I don't want to have to ever fire anybody, so I'm gonna
And
keep
I don't
this
think
thing
he ever
really
would
small.
have.
Yeah, he wouldn't have.
And I think that's a blessing and a curse
Right.
I've found through my life.
Sure.
And he's that way, I'm that way, Dad's that way, Mom's that way. We are people pleasers, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad.
Definitely can be bad too.
Yeah. And generally speaking, I think, all points. Like I'm sure you had to get a little bit of a veneer of like power sometimes
That's
where
what I
you're
got
not
Jeff
going to
for.
get see and like I had to get a thicker skin because inevitably you're going to get horrible emails and like horrible coworker or whatever it is in TV, so that got a little bit better.
Yeah.
But
So
did you feel like called intentionally to be a part of the agency?
yeah,
or
no.
No.
So I went to
great advice.
Colorado for college, and there's a couple of funny quotes in my life that'll always stick out. My mom said to me as I was leaving for Colorado, she's like, "If you come back with dreadlocks smoking pot, I'm pulling you out." And I probably came back the preppiest person ever.
Oh,
Well, because you went to Denver, not Boulder.
I went to University of Denver instead of like Boulder.
Yeah.
And so a little bit different vibe there. And so I wanted to go into finance, right? And this is like I was started in 02, so I was graduating in 06, got a job with a hedge fund. Thought I was this hot trader or whatever.
Finance bro.
Finance bro.
Yeah.
Before the puffy vests were cool.
Yeah.
It was,
Yep.
And so I came home, my wife and I, who's my high school sweetheart, right? I come home and we're about ready to get engaged. And my wife's grandma, who's still alive to this day, 94 years old, she's like, "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. You got a job." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." Like kind of this didn't sound right. And she's like, got a question to ask you. She's like, "You want to make money, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Do you want to control how much money you make?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." She's like, "Well, who chooses that today?" I go, "Well, the Bigelows do. They own the fund." She goes, "Go home and shingle your dad's roof. One day it'll be yours." And I was like, "Oh." And so I finished out my year there in Denver. I had an apartment, and my wife and I were getting married back in Chicago in 07 or 08. And so we kind of finished everything up, moved back in 07, and I started working with Dad, employee number 3. Thankfully, he never fired me because he couldn't have.
You wouldn't have been able to do it.
And we just started, what I would say is like at that point in time, Dad was is a really good tactical insurance person, right? So like he loves to understand how plans work and why they work and why a claim files one way and how a plan, like a self-funded plan's built. Like he just loves that stuff. So he spent probably the next 8 years just teaching me everything about insurance. And then we started to grow a little bit, right? And so like we kept adding more business on the benefit side between 08 and like 2014. And that was right when Obamacare was kicking around. And at the time we were like, do we sell to somebody? And we thought about it and we're like, you know what, let's double down a little bit. And we were still so small. Like we weren't going to get anything of value at the time. And so in 14, he came to me and he goes, "Hey, I have no intention of running a business. If you want to do that, it's your call. Go ahead and do it. But I will help like back it financially. I just need to make what I was making before and we can reinvest the rest." Right. And so I went to another guy who's in our town who actually grew up across the street from my wife. Their family was in the property and casualty business, the Meyerses, right? So I go to Jeff and we got talking and we said, let's bring this thing together. And both of our dads, Larry and Will, so my dad's Will, Larry's Jeff's dad, they go, "All right, we're cool with this and we'll form this Meyers Glaros Group. But we have one condition. We will never share in money." And we're like, okay, so what is it? It's a marketing arm, essentially, right?
Okay.
So we ran it from 14 to 18, essentially, it's just a shell company. During that time, benefits continued to grow. And I think grow now, and I'm like, man, that's not even that much of growth. But at the time, we thought we were like,
It's all relative.
Right, it's all relative.
Yeah.
And so we were growing. And in 2018, Jeff and I went to both of our dads and said, "Hey, we want to buy you out." I had been kind of prepping my dad for it, and he'd been talking about it for a while. He's, at the time, he's probably 4 or 5 years older than Larry. And I remember walking into the meeting with Jeff, and we weren't sure what Larry's decision was. Like, we weren't sure what he was going to decide to do. So we pitched this whole thing, and Jeff, before the meeting, goes, "Well, man, this is either going to work or I'm going to be fired." And I go, "If you're fired, we're walking with you, we'll go do this thing together." And Larry saw like the value of it and understood it. And it was like, "Yeah, let's go." And so at that point, I bought my dad's brokerage. Jeff brought his dad's. We allowed them to stay in with us in some component. And then we brought them all together in 2018. And at the time we had like 12 people.
Okay.
Right? 13 people. It wasn't much. And then we bought another brokerage in like 2019, brought somebody else on in 2019 that had been at one of the major insurance brokerages. And then we just kind of took off, right? And we tripled in the next 6 years size-wise from a revenue perspective. And then also in the midst of it, we brought Megan in to help us with the communication side of it.
Yeah. So while this is all going on, did you just did you reject the idea of ever working in insurance, or is it because your career was going so well that you never?
Yeah, but it was like always my backup plan.
It was.
If that makes sense. Yeah, because
the backup plan,
yeah,
right? Like,
well, but I thought,
yeah,
and as I kept going in TV, I realized that it was never quite what I envisioned,
Yeah.
So I remember
That's interesting.
This is kind of a funny story, because it does take over your life. You're going to have to work Christmas. You're not going to be able to go to your kids' parties. You're not going to be able to pick your kid up if they're sick because you can't leave that job. There's no one to do the weather. You have to be there.
Right.
I went in sick. I went in the middle of the night.
You can't put it out of office for
Right.
No, and you chances are you couldn't even get the vacation that you wanted. So I couldn't even necessarily get spring break off because unless there was someone to cover me, you know what I mean? So they kind of own your life in large part. And so I just always thought I might not be able to do this forever like this. And plus I was waking up at 2:00 in the morning. And when I did network stuff, I was waking up at midnight so that I could get in, do the network stuff, shoot that, then do the show, my regular show. And, so it was I always kind of thought I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this forever.
Well, it seems like an unsustainable
It
pace
is.
to run at. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And as the kids got older and they had activities, I, of course, I was not going to just pawn them off on somebody because I wanted to be there. I wanted to be a good mom too, but it was you really have a very hard time doing both of those things.
Sure.
So it was always my backup plan. I thought oh, maybe I'll do that at some point or whatever.
When she'd get real frustrated, she'd call me and say, so what do you think?
Yeah.
What could I sell?
Yeah.
Right.
What,
And now she's in and she's like, I don't want to sell anything.
You have an interesting transition of what happened though.
Yeah,
Would it
yeah.
ultimately cause you to leave that career? You want to tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. So basically what happened was in that business, it is not kind of like it is in other businesses, right? If you get fired essentially, right, from a certain business, maybe you did something wrong or you weren't meeting your numbers or whatever it may be. TV is very, very, very different. It may be based off the ratings and they need a scapegoat. The ratings aren't good. Or it could be something along the lines of we hired a new male anchor. And so you don't fit into the picture anymore because now we need a female weather girl or we need a male weathercaster or we need a meteorologist and you don't have the right whatever it is. You know what I mean? It is very subjective and really odd. So as the business during COVID took a huge hit for TV, CBS knocked off I don't even know what % of the workforce, but it was the higher salaried people kind of got let go at that point because we lost 50% of revenue during COVID. And so it was they realized it was not sustainable. Also, that business as a whole, if you think about it, now what do? You pick up your phone to check the weather. You pick up your phone to check the news.
Right.
Many people, younger especially, are not even watching the news. So
my TV is almost never on.
See.
Even if I'm at home. I mean, my wife and I might get a show at the tail end of the night together, and then I'm falling asleep 10 minutes into it, frankly. But the TV, it used to be a thing that, and if you go to my dad's house still, TV's always on, right? That generation's always on. I'm in that middle, I'm a geriatric millennial technically. But I don't really feel the same attachment to television. And I think COVID was a huge part of that.
Huge.
For sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, in TV, you are so lucky if you've only been fired once or twice. I never was. Not one time, all the way up. I was always the one choosing to leave for bigger, better, greener pastures, bigger job, bigger salary, higher profile, whatever it was. But you hit a point in that business where you're making too much and you have a target on your back, essentially. So that's kind of how that felt. And I had many opportunities after that happened in 2020 to go back into the business, but I could not bring myself to do it. I even got an offer for a job that was like a network job. And it was more money than I had ever made. And I literally sat in my car and I was like, I can't do it. I cannot do it because I didn't want to put myself, once I got a taste of freedom, I guess, I couldn't put myself back into it. So my friend Erin and I actually talk about it and we call it TV PTSD because, you don't even realize all the things that it impacted in your life. Even down to what colors you wear and all those things So
well, you were talking about Matt, and I want to bring this back to you, but Matt was talking about some advice you got that kind of changed your trajectory.
Yeah.
It still sticks with you to this day. I remember really early in my career, one of the leaders at Benefit Mall, as a matter of fact, he talked to me about his career path, and he said the one thing he said is never chase the money. Never chase the money. Make good decisions for your career that'll lead to the money, but if you just chase the money, you'll be unhappy. And so you basically said you didn't chase the money, even though it was a lot to be offered. You decided against it.
Well, I did. And part of the reason was because Matt and I had already started building what we're here to talk about today. And I saw such great potential in that. It's almost like I also couldn't walk away from that. I was like, I can't leave this unknown thing that I think has that much potential for something that I know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And I know it's not sustainable forever. And let's be honest, as a woman on TV, like you have a shorter lifespan than the men do. I mean, it's just a simple fact of life. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And so I thought this would be really silly. I could go back to TV and have maybe another 10, 15 years tops, or I could build something that might be really amazing. And I don't want to walk away from that. So that was a large part.
And you don't have to walk away from your family.
Yeah.
Like that's the other.
That would have been a really hard part too.
You know, like, and she's got 3 kids. I have 4 kids. I hear her travel schedule with like soccer and running and all this other stuff. And you're like, you'd never be able to do it.
Yeah.
You'd never be able to see your kids.
Well, how did you ultimately lure Megan to the dark side?
It was like slow at first, kind of.
So I think it was really. There's another really good quote that my wife's grandma gave me.
Okay.
And I think it's important because it kind of goes into what our mantra is like we were doing everything we've done within the brokerages. She also said to me, so I go back to work for my dad. And she and her husband had started a really successful construction company that's essentially they build stadiums and airports all over the U.S., right? Like big.
Not a house. We're talking big
we're
stuff.
talking like, you go to right here in, was this Dallas or what's technically?
I forget where you were.
No, I knew, but I wasn't sure what
the call.
Right, yeah. So I believe they did all the glass and metal enclosure at that stadium, right? So like they're doing
Cowboy Stadium?
This Cowboy Stadium, yeah. So like big stuff. And her son had taken it over in it was probably in the 80s from she and her husband. The husband, my wife's grandpa, really entrepreneurial guy, just owned casinos. We're not sure if he wasn't mobbed up or not. Like, we don't know. His first job was the O'Hare Hangers in Chicago. So we think maybe, you never know. And so back to her comment, though, she goes, I was sitting at dinner with her, and I remember it. We're sitting at this little restaurant. We'd take her out maybe a couple times a month. And she's like, I'm really glad you went back to work for your dad. She goes, I'm going to give you another word of advice. She goes, you got to make it better than what he had it.
Yeah.
She goes, if you don't do it. She's like, if you just want to leave it alone and not make it better, just stop.
Okay.
But if you want to make the business a better business than what you started, than what your dad started it at, you need to plan on how you're going to do that.
Okay, interesting.
And that was like one of those like crucial moments in it. Is like, oh, how do we make it better?
Yeah.
And fast forward to like how we lured Megan into it. Was somewhat serendipitous in a way. Like it was all happening at the time.
Yep.
We had come up with this idea that nobody understands insurance, right?
It's
the most confusing product in the world, and yet it's probably one of the biggest line items for families and businesses, and yet nobody understands how it works, how to use it best, and we in the insurance industry overcomplicate that out of it.
Yeah.
I sit back and I cringe even now as I go out and do, open enrollment meetings, and I say, I'm going to show up and throw up, right? Like I'm going to show up and throw up all this information at these people who hear this one time a year and they don't understand what I'm saying.
Right.
And all they care about is flipping to the 6th page to see what the cost is.
Yes.
Right.
Or what their deductible's gone up to.
Exactly.
Now this year, unfortunately.
And they're going, oh my gosh. And as they're sitting there, they're getting texts from their kids about something that's going on at school. They're not paying attention to it, right? And so in 2019, we had been challenged by this client who wanted to invest in us, Jeff and I at the time, to come up with some sort of technology that would disrupt the insurance industry.
Okay.
And we came up with this grand plan, and we showed up, explained it to him, and he's like, I don't like it. Too confusing. And I said it to you, it's like ABC 1, 2, 3. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Right? Like if it's too complicated, people won't.
So he felt it was too complicated.
He felt which essentially was we were going to be like the entryway to the employee's health experience, right? And it was just going to be too darn complicated for them to figure out and ultimately use. And so as we were going home, not feeling the best because we were upset from losing the opportunity, so Jeff and I are driving back and we're like, the problem is nobody understands insurance. we ought to incentivize employees to start to understand insurance.
Okay.
And then we're like, how do we do that? Right. And like, what's the medium to get it to them? And at the time we're like, TikTok was starting, and Snapchat,
Instagram was big, obviously, YouTube,
all of it.
everything,
All of it was starting to pick up at that point, where we were realizing that like people don't want to sit in 30-minute meetings, right? They want to get the information in short, compact pieces.
Yep.
And so we started talking to Meg, like, hey, how would you simplify insurance? Right. And she's like, well, we have to get all our news things done in less than 90 seconds. So why are you thinking you're any different? Like, how are you explaining these complex things in less than 90 seconds? And we're like, oh, shoot. So how do we do it? So we started coming up with the idea of creating a character that would go out and educate employees on a monthly basis about their benefits, right? So it could be
that character,
Holly, which is not her name.
Which is
Not my name, but I am called Holly so
I
often.
accidentally called you Holly.
Yes, it
we had
happens
dinner
a
last
lot.
night. I'm like, Megan?
Yeah.
I was thinking Holly the whole time. Yeah.
I answered to both.
Yeah, but so where did the character Holly come
I think it just rhymed, right?
Yeah, it just rhymed. And we were
They
just
had the name when they asked me to do it already, and I was like, okay.
It's a little grotesque, but as we were coming up with it, there was this joke within like the little group that we were building this in, is that everybody takes their phone to the bathroom, right? And so if we can just catch a person one dump a month, right?
That's not a tagline. We
not on the
continue
website.
to run
It's not on the
with.
website.
No.
But if we can just catch them one time a month, where they could get them to watch some benefit stuff and they earn something from their employer, it's a win.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was kind of like the beginning of it. I'll always remember that. We're like, oh, no, let's just catch it one time a month, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and apparently you were on to something.
Yeah.
I mean, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So PlanSight is a complete game changer in the world of insurance brokering. As a broker, you know how time-consuming and error-prone the traditional RFP process can be. Well, what if I told you there's a better way? PlanSight is the only end-to-end RFP solution on the market made specifically for benefits agencies. It's like having a superpower that gets you an average of 8 to 10 hours back per employer renewal per year. And the best part? PlanSight supports all carriers, all funding types, and all group sizes for over 20 different benefits. If you're ready to make your RFP process faster, more efficient, and more profitable, it's time to call PlanSight. Visit plansight.com now to book a free demo and discover the future of insurance renewals. So what did you think about this notion of one, entering into the world of insurance, but two, like using your skills to actually apply here?
I think it was a challenge. Honestly, at first I was like, yeah, I can turn those pieces. Like I probably
You probably
finished.
thought it was too simple, right?
Yes, and I probably.
And when we explain it to people, everybody says, what's so hard about it? And we're like, there's a lot more to this.
There's a lot more to it. Yeah, because I mean, he gave me like 10 topics and some PDFs and stuff. And I was like, okay. So I sat down, and I think I was still in TV at this point, maybe for like another month or
Let's
something.
cut that part so they don't hear
Yeah,
that.
no.
No, that wasn't true. Yeah, right.
No, but I was just writing it. I was
just
only
writing.
writing. We hadn't shot anything yet. So, but anyway, I wrote these pieces. And it probably took me like, a very short amount of time because I was so used to writing pieces. And
Like,
I was like,
what is a deductible?
Yeah.
Right? And
like,
she dumbed it down.
Figured out. But I think the part that I was able to bring to the table is that if I would sit down with Matt, because initially it wasn't like, oh, hand me this PDF and I'll turn the piece. Like I needed to understand a little bit more about it because I didn't even have any basis of knowledge. Like when I was doing my open enrollment at CBS, I would call Matt or my dad and be like, I don't even understand this. Which one should I pick? And what do I do? And I didn't know. Right. So what we have essentially tried to do is scale benefits expertise, somebody like him, out to everybody.
Okay.
So that it's like somebody's holding your hand to help you understand these things that you inherently don't know. You're paying for it.
Mhm.
I think insurance is the only place where people don't get a chance to shop and make a choice based off like how you would buy a car or you would do anything else. You're kind of stuck with it. But you have to buy it and you need it, right? So it's like at least the least that we can do is help people understand what it is that they're purchasing.
Sure.
Right. And there's so many different things. So we wrote these first couple pieces. Every piece is less than 90 seconds because every time a reporter gets an assignment, that's how much goodwill we know the viewers will give you. You got about 90 seconds. Really, you have to grab them in the first 10 or so, and then you can keep them for about that long before the attention span is gone. So we were like, all right, we'll just make them all really, really short. And honestly, some are very easy to make short, and some I'm like, oh, I got to cut something else out. And I think what I've noticed in the insurance industry more than anywhere else is that everything is important. And I don't mean that in a weird way. I mean, like, right, if you're going to have a program or something, everything is important. We're going to bring the costs down. We're going to help the person with their health outcome. We're going to do this, and they have to get into this, and they have to do that. And it's like, okay, yes, that you know all of that, but not all of that is necessary for the health plan member to understand in order to see the value in it and use it.
Yeah.
Like, they don't need every tiny detail. And that's the thing that I think you learn when you're turning a piece, when you're reporting on a story or whatever. If you get it sent out to cover a fire or a shooting, it doesn't matter what color the house is behind where the fire took place. It doesn't matter that there's, a bush on the right and a tree on the left. What matters is that the house caught fire. There were 4 people in the house. Firefighters showed up. Everyone was rescued. End of story, right?
Yeah.
Not the tiny little details. So you had to take all this weird information and then figure out what's actually important.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And I don't think, honestly, because now I can say this with confidence, because we've been doing this for a while now. Almost every HR lead that we've talked to, they don't have the ability to do that. They're also married to all those tiny pieces of information, and they don't have that skill to be able to make it understandable.
Well, and it's not just the education. I think, Matt, you were saying this. It's the communication to people, finding them where they're at, making it simple for them to understand. It's the impactful, simplistic communication that really is the point.
And I think that's like, we go back to, and I said it so many times, and when I've talked to people about it, it's like the major issue in insurance is communication, right? Like, the product's the product. It will work most of the time the way it should work. The problem is that people don't understand how it works because they've never been communicated how it works, right? Yeah. And so I always think, Meg was explaining all the technical stuff, and I just think the easiest stuff is like these TPA or carrier apps, right? Do you know how many people don't download them, right?
Or they because they don't know
all the tools, but we also don't need to tell them all the tools at one time. We need to tell them, hey, you should download this app, right? Communicate why the app's important. Then maybe 2 or 3 months later, we communicate how they can do cost estimators or something along those lines, driving them back to the app.
Right.
But we try to show up and tell them everything in that one little bit of time about why they need the app and all the great tools and all the things that it can do for them. And it just gets lost, right? The person doesn't understand it.
And they get a handy dandy benefit guide that's like this big, right? Where they're like, oh, they're never going to read it.
I've not done the actual like cost analysis on it, but I'd love to see how much money employers lose doing open enrollment meetings.
Oh, just from an hourly
rate. And there's a lot of value to them. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but what I'm saying is, like, if you have a manufacturing plant that has to shut down for an hour for an open enrollment meeting, how much money are they losing at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
And so we've even taken the path of like, how can you get more creative about open enrollment, and how can you educate the employees through video and those sort of things in open enrollment in a short, compact time, and it's not available, for like wide usage today, but in the pinch, we can go to Meg and say, hey, we need an open enrollment video, and we need it done in less than 4 minutes, right? And she'll be able to do this because you got groups that have hundreds of employees that need to know what's going on, but they don't have a way to.
Well, so these Holly's health talks is what it's called, right? So what does it look like for an employer? So a client of yours ultimately would have access to it. It's a buy up, I presume, or something. So then you roll it out. What does it look like from the engagement perspective for an employee?
So I think it's probably good to start with who it's valuable for from an employer perspective, and then we can talk about the engagement side of it. And Meg's got really good ideas on, or like insight onto like who's good at it and who's not. Not the individual people, but the profile of what makes sense.
Okay.
Yes.
And it doesn't match with what you'd think.
Not necessarily.
But typically, we're looking for large, fully insured employers or mid-market fully insured employers. Okay. And that's just because we want to educate them about the tools that the carrier has available to them. But our main market is the self-funded employer. And it's because that we can actually go to a self-funded employer and say, if we put these products in place, we can educate your employees about them, show you who's watching them, and see if they're using the products at the same time by the reports provided by the vendors. So from a self-funded perspective, we're able to actually go in and give actual insight of saying like, here's what we've educated about, Here's how many people have watched it. Here's the engagement side of it. And you can then, the story is the employers, well, we can actually help you track the cost savings, right? And
Which,
impact.
as a broker, though, so now Matt's not only able to bring a strategy to the table, but he's able to say, okay, this is my strategy. And here's how we're going to make sure that your employees understand and will best utilize this strategy to hopefully keep costs down, to make sure that they know everything that they have available, right? So now this is a little more stickiness for him too, because not only has he brought the strategy, but he's brought this communication tool, and he can turn around and say, look, like, 87% of your people watched this, so we know that they understand about cancer care or whatever it may be, right? I don't think other brokers have the same ability to do that.
Yeah.
Because their education typically is like, I'm going to give you this PDF, HR person, now please forward this PDF out in an email.
How many people have actually opened that email?
Yeah.
Like less than
Did you say it's like less than 1%?
It is. It's 0.98% of employees open insurance-related emails. So you're not reaching them. And when we did a bunch of studies, we realized that HR leads don't know who's opening what. They don't know who has a general understanding of anything. They're doing their best, but they're also dealing with work comp and all this other stuff. So they don't have time to just be educating their employees on like what's a deductible or something.
It doesn't matter if you're talking about a 50 life self-funded plan that's a beer distributor or a 5,000 person manufacturing plant. They all have the same problem. It's the exact same thing. 50 or 5,000. They don't know if their people are actually understanding all the products they have.
Well, there's three factors here as I'm listening to you guys. There's three factors at play. One is you mentioned it's really impactful for self-funded employers because by nature of being self-funded, you have a few more moving parts. It's a little bit more complex. So that's one. You have point solution fatigue, which we talked about last night over dinner, which is all these vendors offer these amazing solutions, but you have to parse them and make sense of them. And also, do I even want to use that or not? When should I use that? And the third one is pulling it all together in a way that's now simple, and simple to understand and simple to use. And so you have all these factors at play, and then the business owners want to know that there's actually an ROI for the investment in this tool as well. So now you're tracking that on the back end, right? So it proves to them that there is.
That's right.
We have a group we're in the middle of a conversation with right now, and it was one of those ones where like we got the intro, we thought it was kind of not go anywhere, and we started talking not specifically about insurance, but about a communication. This is a big group, a couple thousand employees. And the guy goes, he goes, we have a product in place right now that we pay for. And of our 2,000 covered lives, we had 10 people use the product last year. And he's like,
that's probably par for the course.
And he's like,
they don't know what it is or how to use it.
He goes, and it's not like this thing's, saving the world. It's just like a cost estimator tool. He's like, but we paid for it and nobody used it. And we talked to him about our platform, Holly's, and he's like, this is what I'm looking for. He's like, communication's our number one problem. You're talking to a group with thousands of employees that should have the resources to get it out and explain it. But they can't because they got to meet the people. You think about like the employee. The employee is working. They've got family at home. They've got situations that are going on. They don't care about healthcare until they use it.
Until they have to become a super user, and then they'll figure it out because they had to go to 47 doctors and read 87 EOBs, right? Then they know.
Or they'll pay attention to it if there's something in it for them, right? If you ask an employee to do something like we were talking about, on-site screenings, right? If you don't give them an incentive to go and do an on-site screening, guess what? Your average employee is probably not going to take the time to go do on-site screenings. You give them a little bit of an incentive to do it, either in premium contribution reduction or as some sort of benefit. Guess what? They're going to go and do it because there's some value to them.
They have to understand the value.
Please,
to understand the value, I think, is how you get people to use a tool. But I think if you're Matt and you're an HR person, the value in these tools, maybe, and of course you want better, healthier outcomes for the people involved, right? But the value to HR and to Matt is we're going to lower costs. That may not be the same value, and they're not probably going to communicate that value to the plan member. They just say, oh, this tool is available. The value to the plan member is very different. So when you're looking at these programs, not only when I'm trying to create these pieces, am I thinking like, oh, okay, we want to get people to use this. I'm like, why should they use it? What's valuable in this tool for them? Because that is never communicated in the PDFs that people hand out. It's never like, look, if you have cancer, this is going to help you heal faster, feel better, have a support reset. You won't know, right? So we have to find the value in it. And so that's like one of the things that when we would have consultants come back in my TBDs, it was like, what matters to the people at home? And that's how you connect with your audience. And that's how you get them to continue coming back. And that's how you get them to do whatever.
When I think of your audience a lot as HR, I mean, this must engender you to HR significantly because you're making their lives a lot easier. And you're taking the complexity that they might have some resistance or fear of the unknown from. And you go, hey, we can actually communicate this for you and take that off your plate. This is why you should do it. There's a financial incentive to do it. But this thing will make it so much easier for people to understand. And you, as the HR person, don't have that burden.
I was with a group yesterday, and it was interesting because they said they moved to us about a year ago, and they're like, we knew that our claims and our history was bad. Like our claims history was bad. But when our CEO asks what we're doing to address it, we now actually have a an action plan for it. So we meet with our groups on a monthly basis. And if they're self-funded, in a lot of cases, Meg and her team will come on the call to listen.
Okay.
So we'll go through and we'll say, hey, here's how your claims ran. Here's some of the, the trigger spots that we're seeing that are driving the costs. And maybe we'll figure out that, average percentage in a group is 10% for diabetics, right? 10% of the group's diabetic out there is kind of what the statistic is. And we may see in the group that from their claims data, we'll see that only maybe 3% of the group are registering as diabetics. So we know that there's probably a group that's either not diagnosed or not taking their medications.
Yeah, because the stat is 85% of people who have prediabetes do not know it.
Right.
So if you look at that and you see that a group is significantly below the norm, you've got to figure some of those people are falling in that 85% who simply don't know.
Right.
So then we need to educate about what you should do for diabetes prevention, what types of things you should be doing on a regular basis, like get your sugar checked, like whatever it may be.
So we change the rundown in the middle of the meeting. We'll be sitting there talking to the client. We'll say, hey, Meg, I think we should adjust next month's video to be more focused in on diabetes or preventative care. And then we talk to it's typically the HR CFO that's on the call with us and be like, look, you may want to consider doing like an incentive for them to go in and get their health screening or whatever it may be to drive it, because here's what the data says. And the group yesterday is like, even though our claims are still bad, our CEO is okay with it, because he understands that we're actually doing something to try to address it.
Well, because now they can sit in the meeting, if you're the HR lead, and you can say, okay, we've got a big problem with cancer, but our broker put this program in place called Cancer Care, and it's supposed to, it should help us with savings with the people because they're going to have better, healthier outcomes, whatever it is. Not only do we do that, but here are the statistics of who watched it. We had 75% of our people watch it. We followed up with the call to action, which is the link to make sure they're aware of how to reach the cancer care people. So now we're adding an extra piece to the puzzle, which was the piece that was missing, which is this is what we did about the strategy that we have in place, and this is who watched, and now we know. And so, for example, if you look on that list and you see that someone who as an HR person was recently diagnosed with cancer and they didn't watch, then maybe you want to go up to them and say, hey, look, like this program might be a great tool for you. It just gives them a little bit more of a holistic view of the engagement and education level of the group.
Well, it's actionable too, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And coincidentally enough, Cancer Care is going to be in the seats tomorrow. Conversation.
Yes. I keep using that one because it's such a great example.
Obviously, they're in our toolkit at Pareto, so we talk about Cancer Care all the time, and they're amazing. But what I want to ask you guys is, like, how often are we keeping this content evergreen or updated? How often are you doing these videos? And then are there sort of generic, universally deployed videos as well? I presume that's the case, right?
So there's a way to look at how we build the content out, which allows us to stay very evergreen and fresh on it. So first of all, we have about 150 pieces in the library right now.
Wow.
And on average, a group will use one per month, right? So most groups are one piece of content per month. That's their rundown, is that list of content per month. So we're not asking...
Have you found that cadence to be the right balance?
Yes.
Yeah, we've had a couple groups that wanted to do like twice a month, and it's like, it's a little much.
Well, because what we do is we send the first piece of content out. If someone doesn't watch, we may retarget just those who didn't watch another time. So we'll set that rundown down. And like Matt said, we can pivot and adjust throughout the course of the year to change based off, like, they're seeing a really high number of people overusing the ER and they really could have gone to urgent care. Okay, well, let's educate about that and remind them that it's much cheaper for them to use the urgent care. And then let's give them a link to find an urgent care that is on their health plan, that's in their network.
Most of the time, the content doesn't change that much, right? Because we're keeping it very general but specific, right? So it might be about an app. Well, most of the time that if you're with a typical, if you're with one of the bukas and you've got that app's going to be universal across their entire platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you're with a TPA and they've got their app, it's going to be universal across all the clients for the most part.
Yeah, and we may need to change stuff. Like, so for example, it was the KISS card and now it's Valens Health, right? So I need to go back in studio and fix that piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. That's not that
You
big
can just
of a deal.
insert a little dub like kiss. It goes kiss.
Yeah, exactly.
With my voice instead of Megan's.
The solution is the same as far as I understand, but I get what you're saying, right? It's not everything can stay useful forever without.
What is a deductible is still what is a deductible. But to your point, like how we're selecting what content to do next and what would take priority. Okay, so for example, we're getting ready to roll it out to several Michigan groups likely here coming up in the next several months. So I know I need to build out a little bit more Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Priority Health, because that's primarily what they have up there. So I'll pick the pieces that are most effective, where it's a tool that we really need to explain. But if it's something like a smoking cessation program that Blue Cross Blue Shield has, for example, we have a video about smoking. So the call to action or the link that we provide at the end is going to derive those Blue Cross Blue Shield plan members directly to their specific place.
Well, I don't want to, I'm certainly not summarizing the podcast yet, but like, I don't want to overstate probably how important this is for the industry. I mean, it's because I sort of built this podcast and the stuff I do, the thesis of like, if we better educate people, like true consumerism is empowering people to understand what they're doing, not raise their deductible so there's more cost share on their plate, right? That's not empowering and that's just stifling their ability to pay and consume care. This is what the industry needs. And obviously you guys, this may not be universally accessible to everybody, but this is the type of thing we need. Better healthcare literacy in the United States.
We always say, like, what's the old saying about like when the water rises, all boats rise. Right.
Rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks. I'm terrible at
well, because your grandma-in-law didn't say it.
Right, exactly. Like that's burned into my head, but I can't remember.
So
But I think that's the thing is like, and that's why we're so passionate about it. And when people want to talk about like what we've done with Holly's Health Talks, we're like, yeah, we'll tell you. Right. There's a lot of stuff that is just beneficial for the end user, right? Like, and it goes back to like, why did Dad get into insurance? It was to help people, right? And it's like, that's what we're trying to do is we're just trying to help.
Well, and I think even our industry itself is due for a refreshing of the perception that people have of it. It's got a very negative stigma.
Well, people hate what they don't understand, right? Many times we find that all throughout life. Like, you don't understand a group of people, and that's where hate
and it's easy to demonize them as well.
That's right. And so if you understand what you have as a plan member, and you understand the value of these programs that you have, and you understand the value of what you're paying for, you're also going to feel like benefits is worth more and is a part of your entire package. Right? It's these people. So retention, we feel like it has indeed helped in some cases with retention because now people understand the value of their benefits.
Well, it can and should be an asset to the employer and not a huge liability. And most people treat the way they purchase insurance, treats it as a liability, and they get handcuffed off and being fully insured that they can only erode the quality of the plan to save costs. There's a way to improve benefits, lower costs, and make people actually value the benefits that you offer.
And that's become a lot of our conversation with employers as we talk about moving them from fully insured to self-funded. It's like, hey, this is a path, right?
Yeah.
And I always say, like, we're going to crawl, we're going to walk, we're going to run. So stole that from Pareto, right? And the idea behind it is like, we're going to start to educate them. And as long as we can continue to educate these groups about all the opportunities, we can go back and talk to them about like, how do we control the cost, right? Or how do we lower it? How do we beef up the benefits? And I think that's really, to your point, is like, it shouldn't, it's not a liability. It's really an asset, right? Like if we use it the
And
right
it's not
way.
mutually exclusive to think that you can improve the benefits and
Right.
lower the cost simultaneously.
Exactly.
Most people have that misconception
Right.
that you can't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Well, and so I want to ask you guys, as we progress kind of the future,
Yeah.
I want to think about the future, this evolution of
Yeah.
Health Talks, what it means for your business, where
Yeah.
this thing's going. Like, talk to me about what your long-term vision is for it.
You want to start that one?
So as of June 1st, we were acquired by Hub,
Yeah.
right? So that was not really well known, but it's known, right? And so we're really excited to see where Holly's Health Talk goes within the Hub family, the Hub Nation, as
It's
they
got
refer
some
to it.
alliteration of possibilities with it, right?
Right?
That's Holly's Health Talk.
Holly's Health.
Right. And so I think that side of it is like, it's still TBD, right? And so right now we're working within our region to see and to roll it out within that region first, and then ultimately to go outside of it. I would say from a, like, if I had a piece of paper and would roadmap out what this looked like, and not saying it's going there, but what it theoretically could do in the future is if we could tie it to claims data and really see what people are claiming, and then corresponding that with, are they engaging with the videos, right?
Yeah.
And are they actually watching the videos? And if they are, how's their healthcare like journey changing, right?
Well, you should be able to connect those dots because you guys already have the engagement data.
Yep.
The presumption is that the solution is there and people are using it. It works to lower claims. So you get the engagement, it drives them to utilize. It should lower the cost of care over time.
Right.
So it's
That
just
should be provable.
right. That should be a very provable thing.
Yes.
And I think what we've really been a focus on, and I just, say it is like, we're a really big partner of Pareto's, right? So what we do is any group that we take
A lot of Pareto
self-funded.
I was saying, can you guys look
yeah.
at the camera?
Right.
I have
Really
a
big
lot of
Pareto.
Pareto content.
So any group that we take self-funded, and primarily they're going into the captive if they're the right size. Actually, we kind of said if you're not in the captive and you're below this size, like, we don't want to work with you. Essentially is what we've told them, just because it's just too risky for us. I have a claim right now that may turn into a $14 million claim.
Ew.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's for a very large
That's a
group.
biggie.
But even still, for this group, it's going to be a big, big problem. When we were talking, no, they're not. They're not. Yeah. They're on their own, right? Yeah. And so, but it was interesting because we were talking about it, and it's like that situation right there is the value for small employers of why we put them into Pareto, right? They'd never be able to take that on.
Okay. People use fear sometimes to
Right.
sell. And it's easy to talk about the hemophiliac claim
Right.
that may hit your plan. The reality is they are out there,
Yeah.
but there is much bigger claims than the average hemophiliac.
yeah.
And we're dealing with one that's of that similar
Yeah.
size right now that's a premature baby situation.
Yeah.
Those humongous claims exist. And I actually looked at HCC study recently, not to take us too far off track, but the frequency of those, there's a clear trajectory, increased frequency from the ACA.
Yeah.
And I don't see that slowing down anytime soon either. So you have to be prepared in the event that something like that.
We are not particularly healthy as a nation, quite honestly, at this point. So we know those costs are going to go up, right? That's an inevitability, I think, unfortunately.
I had somebody who said once, why take a pill when you can get a shot? Right. And it's just, that's the way we kind of treat healthcare, is like, just treat us with medication. And there's another whole aspect to that. But to the Pareto side, back to where we were going before I went on my tangent about the $14 million
I think I pushed you
claim,
that way,
right?
yeah,
but hey, is any group that we take into the Pareto captive, we're putting our Holly's Health Talks plan behind it. So back to your thing about like, what does it look like in the future? Is like, we've been testing it with our Pareto groups, and it's interesting. We had probably 6 or 7 groups go for January 1, and we put them all on the same talk track and put in the same programs.
Same
Nice.
rundown.
And the same rundown. Sorry, talk
Rundown.
track, whatever.
I just-
Rundown.
let's just-
And so right now we're 7 months into the year, 8 months into the year, and we have already seen an uptick in Balance Health, or
Balance. I think is what I
card.
say.
yeah, the old
Balance
Kiss
Health.
X card.
Yep.
And we have already seen and have utilization from them tied back to the groups that launched the Holly's Health Talks education and it's through the roof on what we've seen. Like groups with 60 employees that have had 16 and 18 procedures.
Yeah.
Right. And we're
Well,
going,
and it's one of those things like assuming obviously they have the contracts in that location, so that is a limiting factor.
Exactly.
But as long as they exist, it's one of those no-brainer things to deploy because it absolutely will help you avoid and reduce costs. It's provable.
And then
the contracts are there.
But it makes sense to you guys.
Yeah.
And the PDF makes sense to the people who created the PDF. But if you're like Joe on the factory floor, you're like, what? And then you wonder.
I'm gonna get a kiss.
Yeah. What does that mean? And then you wonder.
from that Holly character?
So you have to think about like that consumer who doesn't really understand it. Like where might their skepticism come in?
Sure.
So when I was writing that piece, I was going like, how do I know that the doctor they're going to give me is actually legit
It's not
doctor?
crappy, right?
Like, what's a crappy doctor? And I want to go see my doctor, and I don't, So like, then how do you write around that so that they understand that? Listen, you're getting also a super high quality provider that we've vetted. That so you can't forget that piece. So I think like creating the piece, you have to look at what the program is or what the topic is. Then you have to look at what the average person would think about it. And then you have to meet that somewhere in the middle.
Well, see, that's the mark to me of a brilliant salesperson because you're thinking ahead of what the potential objections may be and you're redirecting them into a positive in advance of them thinking about that. I mean, so you obviously have those skills that probably come naturally to you. Curious, do you think it's so effective because of your background and because of your ability? It has to be, right? If Matt was doing this, would they be as effective?
So I don't mean to I'll answer this one because she doesn't like to brag.
Okay.
That depends on the moment sometimes.
So I always say when people say to us like, oh, so I will joke like it's TikTok for benefits, right?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, great. So you're doing it. And I'll be like, no. And I'll show it to them and they'll be like, whoa. It's actually like, this is really good. And I'm like, yeah, it's because it's not somebody in the industry. And as much as, we as insurance brokers think we're really great at presenting in front of people, we suck at it. Yeah. Right. Like,
fair.
We think we're hilarious. It's just not our skill set.
Yeah.
And so I think like I was joking with Megan. I was like, God, I'm going to be the idiot on screen here with you two because there's Spencer who does this all the time. And you've been doing this for 20 years. And it's like, leaning into her skill set and leaning into her
but you guys have a very dynamic rapport as well.
Yeah.
Like just hearing you guys talk together and obviously
You must be
relationship.
limitless today.
But I think it just comes across, and I'm sure for the listener as well, it's going to come across. So you guys have such a great dynamic together that probably pulls the best out of each other.
Like I think it's fun, and like we'll finish a meeting, and so Matt was getting ready to present. He did present his first like hub meeting when we were part of Hub, and so like he was.
It probably wasn't my best one.
No,
it still was better than 95%.
But it's good though. I like to sit in those because then as soon as we're done, I called Matt and I was like, oh, no, that was way too much on that part. You lost him here, and here. Like because I think I'm looking at it all from a totally different perspective. That's a kind of critique you
can get from your sister, by the way.
That's right.
Your sister is able to deliver
but
that.
she also does it really well with the other, like, like Rob in our office, right? Like Rob's unbelievable. He's literally like my favorite person in the world, Meg's favorite person in the world. And she's able to say, hey, Rob, like try spinning it this way.
Yeah.
Right. And I think she does it in a really good way that we can kind of train our salespeople into like getting crafted better in their conversation.
Yeah. So I think something that was always really important to me, and I know this sounds silly, but I know everyone's seen like that anchor person or that weather person who's like, today, a risk of severe weather. You know what I mean? And it's like,
like the movie trailer guy from when we were growing up.
Yeah, like they're not
in a world.
They're not that person, right? They put on like their TV personality, and that's not really who they are. Like I always took really, really, really great pride in just being completely myself.
Yeah.
I would get in trouble for it sometimes too. Like I had a news director tell me one time, like, you're very Megan. Can you just be a little less Megan? And I was like, but I am bubbly, happy
Megan.
person. Like so my answer to him, as much as a people pleaser as I am, I was like, I have one me. Like this right now is the same one you're going to get on the air. Mm-hmm. So I think if you have like an authenticity in what you're presenting. And so that's, to Matt's point, the same thing that I see happen with some brokers when they're presenting, especially when it's like to a really big client, you're like trying to be like a broker, you know what I mean? But in reality.
What's his name, Joe Broker?
Tom Broker.
Tom Broker.
Yeah,
Tom.
Right? But I mean, you're still wanting, you can only hang on to being someone else for so long in a presentation, in a video, in a whatever it is, before you lose it. Yep. So you just have to be super authentic. So I think that was always why I was so successful in TV for so long, is because that was that was
Well,
always
that and
what
that
I did.
creates a level of trust.
Yes.
Know, like, and trust, right? So now
Right.
people know your videos, they like you, then they trust
Yeah.
that you're telling them good information that's helpful to them, and then they go use it.
So
Yeah.
we had a crazy story a while ago. We've been in place with Holly's Health Talks about probably this is our second year in this particular group. It's like a manufacturing facility. They had like flip phones. I mean, I was like, this is not going to go well. Meanwhile, they put a really good incentive in place and they have 85% viewership every month.
Wow.
Every month. So a couple months back, we aired a piece about sleep apnea.
Okay.
Just what it is. I'm not a doctor, so it's literally like, this is what sleep apnea is. Here's what, the National Sleep Foundation or whatever says are the symptoms of sleep apnea. And then we put a link to, if you have any of these conditions, this is your carrier. And so these are your in-network doc finds, and you would be looking for this type of doctor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the guys found sleep apnea that way. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yep.
He was like, watched the video and he realized, oh no, I better go get checked. And lo and behold,
And as crazy as it is, like, and to be clear, we are not doctors, right?
Yeah.
no, I do
And-
interview sometimes though, where I'm like, I can't even talk about this.
But I think it's interesting because sometimes you think we may be one of the only things that's educating the employee about their health, right?
It's possible.
And so like this guy is a great example of he didn't have a doctor, so he never heard what sleep apnea was. He got it here and went, oh boy, I might actually have that, right?
Right.
And then he went and did something about it, and it kind of hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like we may be their first outlet into like healthcare.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to you about the incentives in that employer that was on the podcast a few months ago, Stephanie Koch with Hendry Marine. She did something similar with a mobile clinic.
Yeah.
And these guys were all blue collar, hardworking manufacturing guys, wouldn't go to the doctor. And they're like, well, what if we just put this mobile clinic literally outside of our factory 2 days a week? And even then still had difficulty getting adoption and getting them to go.
Yeah.
And so they added an incentive with some PTO as a lure in a raffle. And all of a sudden everybody went. And then what happened is 2 of them found potentially life-threatening issues early on and prevented that. And she firmly believes they saved 2 lives as a result of that. Maybe this guy with the sleep apnea, who knows what happened, developed there. So like there is really far downstream impact to the things we do. And sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day, we forget like a human being's on the other end of this, and this information might sway what they do with their lives.
Yeah.
Could even help them in a health situation.
And I think that was
That's important.
that was what made our dad so special in insurance stuff when he first started, and still what makes him so special is that like he really was in it to help people.
Yeah.
And I think this feels like that in a different way, like for the new age, right? Like what can we do? Because it's not about the broker. It's not about the HR person, because the broker could leave, the HR, it's about the people who are supposed to be using the insurance. If they do not understand it, they might spend more money than they need to. There, all these things can go wrong. They're stressed about it. Like, let's actually help the people understand what they have so they can use it right.
Yeah.
And like we had one group who they were fully insured and they had like a really bad year, right? And then they, but we had Holly's Health Talks in place for like 2 years. They had, I don't know, 90% viewership. Like they're a really high performing group. And Matt had to take them self-funded. But they didn't have any concerns about as much disruption because we just started educating about, okay, now you're on the UMR app. You have the KISS card program. This is where you're going to find your doc find out. Like we just picked up where we were already going.
Right.
And
They'd already been trained.
we just started educating them. Yeah, we had our viewership already built up. We had the trust already built up, and then we could pivot his strategy.
What it allowed us to do, and I always use this in meetings with employers, is like our job's to make the employer look good to their employees, because the employee doesn't know typically who the brokerage or the broker is behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've all been in the situation where something went completely sideways, right? Like no matter who you are out there, something's gone wrong with one of your clients and you look like you have egg on your face, is the saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I actually take a step further. I'm like, the employee doesn't know that you're the one who screwed it up, or that maybe the carriers or whatever happened. They're looking at the employer going like, you didn't pay claims for me for the last 2 months. And I now have a bill sitting in my, at my house because the TPA there was something wrong with it, right? Like there's just an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an employer, we were losing a group, and I had the employer go, it made me look bad.
Yeah.
Right. And that was one of those moments where it's like, my job isn't to make me look good, right? It's not. It's about making the employer look good to their employees.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times we even position Holly's, we tell the employer, like, tell them it's your education platform, right? Like, and we don't even give them a choice when it's self-funded. We're like, this is how you're going to educate
Yeah.
people. And it becomes part of their HR team's message out to their people.
Well, they'll call me too. Like we got some phone calls the other day after a meeting, and they were like, "Okay, we're having tons of problems. People can't read these EOBs right. Like, can you got a piece on that?" I was like, "Yeah, I do. Can you put that in?" We had a request for explaining what self-funding is and how it impacts the employee. Like, right, most people try to like say, "Oh, the employees don't even need to know that we're self-funded necessarily," but maybe they should, because maybe they'll be better consumers of it, because if they are, then they're going to keep their costs down. So we created a whole piece to explain why your company is self-funded, and this is how you can help keep costs down. Let's just own what it is, right? Because then they understand it. If they understand it, then every other piece that comes after that and every other thing they see is going to mean more.
Employees need to know, so not to the level that we have to understand it, but they need to know so that they feel like they're a participant in it and understand that the decisions they make impact the company as a whole and impact the future expenses that it will be passed on to them. And so whether that's an increased premium or whatever, they're a participant. And it's not their fault if somebody gets sick or somebody contracts a disease. I'm not saying it's their fault, but just understanding the role that you play and leaning in a little bit so that you're a better participant.
You're going to want to hope they're like going in network. These small things,
stopping
right?
and calling the KISS card,
Yes,
which KISS card is inbound, whatever. So I want to go, in the interest of time, I think we've been talking a little over an hour now. Matt, I always ask this question. I want to talk about, in both of your perspectives, but healthcare as we know it today, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years with this thing we call healthcare? I mean, what changes do you envision happening?
So, and I don't have all the detail on it, but this came up about a week ago, and it's very like immediate, I think, but kind of maybe not for your audience. It's not been overlooked, but I think generally in the brokerage world, it has probably been overlooked. Is this whole Medicare change on the Medicare Part D side of it, which I think is going to have a big impact on employer plans that we just haven't seen what it's going to happen. So understanding today, and don't hold me to it, but Medicare adjusted the amount of Medicare Part D maximum that Medicare eligible people can spend out of pocket.
Okay.
Right. I think it's like $2,000 now. And if you are not at a plan that is less than $2,000, at least the way it reads right now is that will turn an employer's plan non-credible, right?
Okay.
So
and what does that do for people?
Right, and so people that are over the age of 65 that are on a non-credible health plan, when they go to sign up for Medicare, when they leave their employer, they're going to get hit with a penalty, right? And I think it's 1% for every month you've not been in it associated with it. And so it's interesting when you think about our wise decision that the government makes, right? The government says, we don't want you pushing people onto Medicare because if they're working, they should stay on the employer's plan. But essentially, they passed a change to the Medicare out-of-pocket maximums that may ultimately push people to Medicare. Is that a bad thing? If I'm an employer, I don't hate the fact that maybe my Medicare people are going off. But I got to do a little bit more research on that just because this came up in the last week or so. And as we're talking through it, one of the guys that specializes in Medicare is like, no, it's going to probably affect the employer plans and what happens with them. So I think that's like an immediate situation in it. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen in October and
November, which obviously that'll have a big impact.
It'll have a big impact on it. But I think, we were always concerned that it was going to become nationalized healthcare at some point in time. And I think now I've maybe come to the conclusion that the industry is so big now. I don't know how it can, but I also don't know how it stays the way it is.
Yeah, I think that both things are true.
Right. And so the benefit that we have in our positions as brokers and advisors is like the willingness to learn and change. And like maybe what we were doing 2 years ago isn't the same thing we can do in 2 years. And it
does feel really antiquated.
And as much as like AI has come into the world and I don't know anything about it other than I've used ChatGPT a lot in the last couple of weeks. And I will tell you, I was listening to a podcast about benefits, right? It was like, what's going to happen with AI and benefits? And somebody said, look, if your only skill is the knowledge that you have in your position as a broker, you're going to get beat by that at some point in time.
Okay.
Right. And it's because essentially it's smarter than us, right? It knows the facts faster and can produce the answer faster. But I also flip around and look at it as like, well, that means I can leverage it to help my employer so much more,
Exactly.
right? And so if it's writing a really good RFP, right, that maybe used to take a long time because you'd have to put pieces all together, you can use the technology to help you do it and just work, make some adjustments to it. And then ultimately, I think that's kind of, it'll be interesting to see where it all like goes. And so we always say like, nothing's bad. It's just we don't know what the good is in it yet, right? So like something you say something bad happened, I say, well, I don't know if it's actually bad. I just don't know what the good is that's come out of it yet. Like there will be something that will be a benefit in the future.
What is your perspective, Megan? You said you're relatively
Mine?
new to this.
Yeah,
still.
I mean, there's so many moving parts and it's so confusing, honestly. Like, there's for regular people out there, it doesn't make any sense at all. To me, I feel like especially in every meeting he's in, all the GLP-1s and stuff, I'm really curious on my end to see if that eventually reduces costs or if there's going to be some sort of side effect or like what's going to play out with that whole thing. But in my mind, I think it's just more important that everyone understands what they have, right? So like he's looking at the big picture and all that stuff and how it's all going to play out. I don't know, and I don't even want to know.
Nor does she really care.
Yeah.
I mean, she cares, but
I feel like
you can't control it.
Yeah.
no, and I just it's a big old mess, honestly. Yeah.
Well, how about this? Then I usually ask for closing thoughts too. Just it doesn't have to be insurance related. Like maybe a quote from grandma.
Right. I was trying to think if there's any other good ones.
No, but I mean, just honestly, I think this is really important. And obviously, not everybody's going to stick around all the way to the end of the podcast. But if there were one or two things that you felt were worthwhile to say, go about your day and think about this or nugget, what would that be?
I think for me, it goes back to what I was saying like a couple minutes back, which is like in our position, we are specifically salespeople are very typically selfish, right? They're very thinking about themselves and but the good ones are thinking about what it's doing for the people they're selling to and how they can help them.
Yeah.
We have to make it about even the one step further, which is the employee, right? And so it doesn't fit, but it's like follow the money, right? Who's the person who actually buys the insurance? The employer buys it on a global basis, but the employee buys it in the beginning. They're the one who chooses to go into the plan. They're the one who chooses to use the insurance, and they're the one who's really burdening the cost when they go in for it. Then the employer is after once their portion comes in. And it's like, how do we help that end user, the one at the way in the beginning, understand how to use the benefits better? And it all goes back to communication. Like, we were talking about a group and Meg's like, well, I heard something bad's going on there. And I go, no, it wasn't bad. It was this situation that happened that caused it. And she's like, well, that's not the message they got, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, let's go back to the message of like, no, employees, your deductible changed for this reason. Mm-hmm. And here's what we did in place to help you. Right. And so here's how we're going to change. And I think if we keep the end person in mind and our goal is then to make the employer look good to that end person, then I think that's really like, to me, that's like the magic to the whole thing. It's like, how do we really help the end person? And then it helps the employer. And ultimately we're there to help facilitate all of it. Cool. But I don't want to be known, right? Like, I don't, like the worst thing is you don't want the employees being like, I hate that guy up there, right? And they do, right? I'm sure they do, because they just look at in our position, we're not the insurance company, but they see us as the insurance company, right? Sure. And that's a really interesting spot to be in. Or the cost of the plan is what they view it us as.
What about you, Megan?
For me, I think when I first came into this whole industry, I almost felt like I kept saying to Matt, wait, you're telling me that the carrier can't talk to the plan member and explain stuff to them? That there's no communication there between the carrier and like, who's helping the people really? Right. And so it almost felt to me, the lack of communication, and I'm not blaming the carriers, but lack of communication in all the places felt almost negligent to the end user, because in my mind, I was like, we're giving people this super complicated thing. It's like giving them a Porsche, but then not the key, not telling them how to drive, but they're supposed to get in and like, race a car. They don't even know what they're sitting in. So to me, it's like the most important thing Well, I mean, because it's the world I grew up in, right? It's like communication is everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not effectively communicating, you're not going to get where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. So even if, a group doesn't use Holly's Health Talks, I would say to the HR lead, to the broker that's watching this, to whomever that is, take a second, take a step back, and think about how you're actually communicating with your employees, not just in terms of benefits, but everywhere. Like, do you really think that what you're doing is effective? Is that the way you would want to be communicated to? Do you think that people actually understand what you're saying? That's my tip. And I mean, you could bring it back to if you watch a brand new little weather person in Market 188. I guarantee if I watch a clip of myself when I first started, I would be like,
Yeah.
you would glaze over while I was talking. You might not know. But then later, once you become really effective at it, people are going to listen. You have to find a way to cut through the noise, even if you don't have like a tool to do it.
Well, and the interesting sort of dichotomy about that is the more effective you are at a communicator, the more people listen to you, the more responsibility you now have to them to deliver truth and honesty and what you said, authenticity. It's a weird thing. It's like the better you are, the more responsibility you get as a result of that. And you guys obviously have leaned into that responsibility quite a bit for those folks.
It's fun. I'm excited. Like, I mean, I literally turned on a couple network jobs for this, so we better make it like work for the yeah.
I hope you're not just only banking on this podcast.
Right?
Get the
Yeah,
word
I mean,
out
the
there,
podcast is going to do
But guys,
it.
it's been really fun. Thank you so much for coming down from Indiana. I hope you have safe travels back.
Thank
and then
you.
I'd love to reconvene at some point in a year or two and just really see the progress that you've made. I'm sure it's going to be exciting.
It'll be a blast.
Thanks, guys.